beef bourguignon without the beef. Well, we are using mushrooms instead. And this is an incredible vegan version of this traditional French dish. It is so rich and has such great texture. I promise you will not miss the beef. I'm Judy Matuski. I am a dietitian and culinary nutritionist with Athens Nutrition. Thanks for those of you joining me live and for anybody watching this on the recording. Well, we have a lot to cover. So this recipe is a little bit more, it's a little longer than some of my other traditional recipes, but it is super simple and it's something you can absolutely make on a weeknight. So just stick with me. One thing that I just want to mention is that when you have a recipe that might have a few extra steps, a few extra ingredients, one thing is to keep in mind is something called mise en place, and that is really kind of having everything in its place ahead of time, you know, pre-chopping things before you even start. And the most important thing is to please read your recipe. Read it through and really get a sense of what's going on and what's coming up. It just will make your life so much easier and it will take the stress out of cooking. All right. So here we go. Mushrooms are the star of this dish, and we are going to use a couple of different mushrooms. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to get started because I want to make sure that we get through all of the steps. I do have a Dutch oven here that I'm just warming up. I'm going to put a little bit of butter and a little bit of olive oil together. The butter just brings a little extra richness, and we're not using a lot, just enough to bring flavor to the dish. And then we're going to saute up the mushrooms and the onions together. Let me just move this off to the side real quick. I have 3 different mushrooms that I'm using. One's a white button, I have a brown cremini, and the shiitake. And I have already pre-chopped these mushrooms up, and I'll show you what I did and how I did those. Just taking the large mushroom, and we really want the texture. So we don't want this to be thinly sliced. So we're gonna cut it in quarters so that you have, you know, a really nice bite to bite into, because that's sort of gonna be mimicking the beef. All right, so these are just being sliced in quarters. The shiitakes are fresh shiitake. If you don't have them, that's okay. You can just use the button or the cremini or a combination. I think it's good with a combination of mushrooms. The shiitake I love because they have such a rich flavor. So I take the stem off because the stem is a little bit tough. I'm gonna set that aside, and the same thing, just slice these into quarters. And now let's go ahead and add our olive oil. So it's about a tablespoon of olive oil. Now I did do this in batches, so because we're using about 2 pounds of mushrooms, and that's a lot of mushrooms. So, and this is pretty hot, so this is gonna really start to sizzle. So I'm gonna start to get these in here. So I did these in 2 batches. It calls for 2 pounds of mushrooms and a large onion. So you really, to get the mushrooms nice and brown, which is really what you wanna do, to really intensify the flavor and to bring out that umami flavor from the mushrooms, you're gonna just put these in your Dutch oven, and they're just gonna sit here for just a little bit because I really want them to brown. The more you move them and stir them, the more they're going to steam than brown. So go ahead, get your stove up to like a medium-high heat. Put your mushrooms and your onions in here. I had the mushrooms chopped and I had the onions, you know, cut into quarters. Because there's so many, I did do it in 2 batches. So just before I went on, I did 1 whole batch of onion and mushrooms that are already in the bowl. So we'll add those later. But this is exactly the step that I did. So we're just browning off these mushrooms. You want that heat to be high enough to really brown them, and that's key. And again, don't be tempted to stir them. I know I want to too, but let them go until you start to really smell that richness, and you can really smell them browning. We want that flavor. All right, while they're browning, let me just talk to you about a couple of quick things. So what makes this mushroom bourguignon so rich and flavorful is just using a combination of mushrooms. You can get by with just all button mushrooms or all cremini. That's fine, but if you can mix it up, I think that brings a little more intenseness of flavor. And even more so, if you can get your hands on some dried mushrooms. These happen to be dried porcini mushrooms, and I found these at my local market. They're, you can see they're very rich, they're very dark. Porcini mushrooms tend to have a really nice earthy and beefy flavor, so they're perfect for a dish like this. What I did though is that you have to rehydrate them before you use them. And it's easy to do. So I just basically, these are drained right now, but I covered them with, you know, maybe 2 cups of water and let them sit for maybe 20, 30 minutes while I was prepping other things. And then they'll rehydrate, and that's what these are. And there's a few of these in here left over. I sauteed some of these up with my first batch, but I'll add these to this batch right now. Well, actually, I'm gonna let this go because these are kind of wet. I don't really want to get, I don't want to bring any moisture to this right now. I want this to brown. So I will add these in a little bit. But if you can do the dried mushrooms, I would really suggest that because you're gonna find that that really helps to add this rich flavor because this is a very rich dish and it's relying on a bunch of different flavors. So typically it would be beef and beef stock and we're doing a vegetarian version of this. So we're relying on the mushrooms to do the work of the beef. And we're still using a stock and I'll talk a little bit about that to bring flavor. And we're relying on some tomato paste, and we're relying on some red wine, because that's really what the beef bourguignon is all about. It's really the red wine. And all of these flavors together really, really make this a dish that I swear you really won't miss the beef not being in it. All right, so these are browning. I can smell them. I have the heat fairly high, and I can tell that they're browning. So now I'm going to give it a little bit of a stir. And we'll let them go just a tiny bit longer. I'm gonna probably, kind of rush this a little bit just for the sake of the video, but you wanna just get these sort of browned up on both sides. The mushrooms, what will happen is they'll sort of release some of their own liquid, and then it starts to get a little more liquid in the pot. Just let it go and let it continue to cook down because then that liquid's gonna evaporate and the mushrooms then will continue to brown. So this step is just a little bit of patience. You just kind of want to let it go for a little bit. And just, again, building the flavor in the bottom of this pan is what we're trying to do. So we want these to brown. We want to get little brown bits at the bottom. Then we'll scrape those up. And that's going to bring flavor to this. All right, so while that's browning up, let me just talk to you real quick about the broth that we're using. So when I rehydrated these mushrooms, in about 2 cups or so, a little more of water. When I took the mushrooms out, what I was left with was about 2 cups of mushroom stock, so to speak, all right? So this is a real flavorful mushroom broth from the dried mushrooms. I'm gonna use this as the broth for this dish. If you don't have the dried mushrooms to create your own mushroom little stock or broth, you can use a vegetable stock, 2 cups of vegetable stock, or you could use like the Better Than Bouillon vegetable base, or they have a mushroom, which would even be better if you can find that. That would be perfect for this dish. This is an unsalted broth, so we'll want to season. This is Better Than Bouillon is salty, so we would cut back on the salt that you would add. Because this vegetable broth is really, there's no sodium at all in it, I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of this Better Than Bouillon vegetable base just to give this a little bit more flavor. And I do need a little bit of salt to bring in for the flavor. All right, so these are doing really well. I'm gonna go ahead and say that these are done. I'm gonna move these off to the side. And now what I wanna do is I'm just taking them out. I'm gonna put them with the other mushrooms, because I need this now, I need to start sort of fresh because we're going to now saute up the onions. We're going to saute up the minced garlic. We're going to saute up the carrots. I have some carrots that are chopped, and I have some garlic that I minced up. So let me get these out as best that I can. And then we're going to go to the next step. And here, when we go to this one, you can turn your heat down a little bit now. You don't necessarily need this to be at a really high heat for this next step. So I'm going to turn it down, although this is going to still be high because it doesn't really shift really quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add my onions, I keep saying onions, my diced carrots and and the garlic. All right, so I just minced that up a little bit. It's about 2 large carrots and maybe 2 large garlic cloves. And now it's about a tablespoon or 2 of tomato paste. So again, tomato paste brings a lot of richness to a dish, all right? So that's that umami flavor that we keep talking about, which is really what meat tends to bring to dishes. So we want to continue to bring that umami flavor into this dish. So I'm going to just brown this just for like 30 seconds or so. I don't want to burn my garlic. So we'll just get that browned up, and it's nice just to cook off that tomato paste a little bit, just to get rid of some of the sort of that tomato, that raw tomato flavor. You know, we kind of want it to become just a little bit, just brown, but only for a tiny bit. Now we're going to add a little flour. This is just maybe a tablespoon or two of flour. This is just going to help thicken up the broth as we're cooking this together, and just kind of move that around, just so it kind of coats the carrots a little bit. So you can see, I mean, just have this sort of brownie at the bottom of the pan. Just going to coat this up. All right, and we don't want to burn anything. So this is really just a few, 30 seconds or so. All right. And now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the broth. So I'm going to add this mushroom broth. If you don't have the mushroom broth, this is about 2 cups. And I did add a little bit of that I did a little bit of that vegetable, better than bouillon. And so let's get this in here. And then now what you really want to do is we want to get this up to a simmer. And you're going to want to take your wooden spoon. If you have a wooden spoon with a flat end, that's perfect for releasing, those brown bits at the bottom, because there are some brown bits that we created from the mushrooms and the onions when we sauteed them and really let them go and develop that kind of crispy flavor or crispy texture. So I'm just using my spoon now. I can feel it. I can feel the little bits at the bottom of the pot, and that's incredible intense flavor. We really want we want to lift that into the broth. All right, so let me turn it up a tiny bit because we want to get this up to a simmer. And then now we're going to add, which is the most important part for our, let me grab my measuring, for this dish, which is red wine. And it's any red wine, a wine that you would drink, don't just use like a cooking wine, a wine that you drink, but not a real expensive one, but you'll have some left over, so you can serve this with your beef bourguignon, your mushroom bourguignon. So this is about 1.5 cups of red wine. I have a Merlot here, that's what I had opened. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that. And again, all of these flavors are just incredible. So because of this red wine and because of the mushroom broth or the vegetable stock or the tomato paste and then the sauteed mushrooms and onions, it just brings an incredible flavor to this dish. All right, so let's let this go for just a second. You know what? I forgot. We're gonna add herbs, right? So we have our carrots, we have our garlic, we have the flour in here. I added the mushroom broth stock, and I also added the red wine. Now we're going to drop in 1 bay leaf and a couple of sprigs of thyme. This is some fresh thyme. You could use dried, no problem. And this is a sprig of rosemary that is fresh, but you could use dry. Either dry would work perfectly well in here. All right, so that goes in, and this is just going to cook along to help add a little more flavor. All right, so we've got this going, and I'm just going to jump a little bit ahead. Let's put these mushrooms back in. And mushrooms, they are the star of this dish, and they are for not only flavor and texture, but the nutritional profile for mushrooms is pretty incredible. Not so much from the nutrients in the sense of vitamins and minerals that we typically think of, although mushrooms can be a very good source of vitamin D, which is hard to find in a lot of foods. So mushrooms that are exposed to sunlight, if you get mushrooms and you sit them on your windowsill, they will actually produce vitamin D while they're sitting on the windowsill. And a significant amount, it can make a big difference. So if you can expose your mushrooms to a little bit of sunlight, give them a little tan, I guess, you'll get more vitamin D. But it's the non-nutrients that are in mushrooms that are really have the attention of a lot of researchers. So there's a whole lot of research looking at mushrooms and their ability to decrease risk for dementia because of some anti-inflammatory compounds that are there. They're rich in polysaccharides and indoles and polyphenols. These are all sort of plant compounds that are anti-inflammatory, not only from an anti-cancer perspective, but also from this cognitive and brain health. So interesting research. A lot of it's done more with the shiitake, maitake, oyster type mushrooms, but any mushroom, get them in your diet. I mean, they're delicious. So, yes, it's great that they bring a lot of nutritional value, but more importantly, they're just so phenomenal and in so many dishes. So it's a lot of mushrooms. So again, we started with 2 pounds. So we're gonna add it all in. All right. And then just give this a little stir. And then what you're going to want to do now at this point, this is going to cook for, probably 30 minutes. So it is very quick. You can see how there are a few steps, but if you have a couple things sort of prepped ahead, this comes together very quickly. So it is definitely something you can make during the week. I mean, a weeknight after work. So this is I'm going to cover this and it's going to simmer for at least 20 minutes. So I'm going to pull it over so that you can see, but you can already see that there is a real richness to that sauce. You can see how dark it is and it smells amazing. So we're going to let that go because we really want these flavors to kind of come together. We want this broth to thicken a little bit so that it's a little thicker and not as runny, which is what the flour is going to do here. So in about 30 minutes, this is just going to all come together and it's going to be ready to serve. The way I would serve it is in a nice big bowl. I would chop up, because of course everybody now, right, is keeping fresh parsley and dill and everything and basil in the refrigerator. So, just take some fresh parsley, chop it up, and then, sprinkle it right on top so it brings a little bit of freshness to the final dish. And go ahead and serve it. Just as a real quick mention, I did find this recipe from, it was Melissa Clark from the New York Times had it up on the website. I just thought it was just amazing. I've made some modifications to it from her original recipe, but that's really the origin of it. And the other thing that I wanted to mention real quick while this is this is coming up to a little bit of a simmer, so I don't want it to boil. I just want it to simmer, so I am going to just turn it down a tiny bit. All right, and then I will just give it a little bit of a cover. Storing mushrooms. I get a lot of questions about storing mushrooms. So I actually bought this Thursday, right? And I bought these mushrooms on Saturday. So I wanted to make sure that they didn't get too wrinkled and too slimy, because that can happen. So when they come in, that little container and they're wrapped in plastic, unwrap them. That's like the worst way to store them. And what I do is I put them in a paper bag and I throw in a paper towel with them. And then I kind of even just keep it open and I put this in my refrigerator. So this is just a great way to store your mushrooms, and you'll get a good week with them staying really nice. So I had those for almost 5 days, and they looked fantastic. They looked exactly like when I bought them. So if you want to get some shelf life out of your mushrooms, definitely store them in a paper bag with a paper towel to help absorb some moisture that they might put off, and just pop them in your refrigerator, and that'll really help. All right, so this is our mushroom bourguignon. Please try it. I think you're gonna love it, and serve it to all your meat lovers, because I think they're gonna enjoy it as well. We still have a few seats left for our dessert course. So if you want to join us, it's this afternoon at 4 o'clock. I will put up the link, or if you're on our website, you'll see, our Facebook page, or you'll definitely see that. It's going to be a great Mediterranean dessert class. So it's virtual. You can sit back and relax, watch it. A lot of the recipes are gluten-free and vegan as well, if that's a concern. But there really are delicious recipes. So if you want to just pop in and join us, that would be fantastic. All right, have a great week. Enjoy this dish, and I will see you next week.